welcome back from your short distance. Hopefully you are refreshed, somewhat satisfied, although I fully acknowledge that I am in between you and dinner, you and drinks, you and the rest of your evenings, and so let's have this be less of a car puttering to a stop on its last tank of gas and more of like in a race, a 400-meter race, how people speed up on the last lap, they save the gas for the end. Let's have that be the metaphor for this session. Especially because the topic of the conversation for our last session here is not a light one. Impact measurement might hit you in your head, it might hit you in your gut, it might hit you in your heart. Measurement, evaluation, impact, quality, these are all words, ideas that evoke a lot of emotion for folks that people have experience with. So it's worth acknowledging at the beginning of any impact conversation that identity plays a big role in these conversations. Measurement is not neutral, data is not neutral, evaluation is not neutral. It is a series of decisions about what to include and not to include, who not to include, what success looks like and what it doesn't. And in doing so, sitting down and having conversations about who you are, where you're from, where you went to school, perhaps what your political beliefs are, who you respect from an academic standpoint, from a professional standpoint. All these things matter not because they're going to get you to a measurement tool any faster, but because it allows you to surface assumptions about what we believe. And measurement ultimately is about belief. And so that's me. I've never seen myself bigger on a screen before. That is bigger than life size. And tonight, this evening, is going to be focused on a few things. We're going to orient around some measurement theories and approaches. That sounds a bit heady. It's going to involve more provocations and inspiration, I hope. So some examples of some measurement ideas and tools that might push your thinking on what measurement could be and can be in the context of what you do. We'll have you take stances on key capabilities of design graduates. There are maybe some things that have been circling, some conversations around what our design graduates should be today, tomorrow, and we're going to coalesce around some of those in pairs. And then we're going to build, break, and take away tools. We're going to end this session hopefully with 30 brand new evaluation tools, 40, however many attendees we have here, that don't exist currently, rooted in the decisions that we make tonight together as peers, as learners about what we can and should measure in our programs. Okay, I'd be remiss in not starting. Oh yeah, also we should have fun, connect, learn things. This is part and parcel of any learning experience. I'm not standing here. I would not be standing here if not for the work that I've done with educators throughout my whole career. In communities around the United States and internationally. This is Rochelle. Rochelle is a high school teacher and now design leader in her school outside of Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. And I mention Rochelle because she's very growth mindset oriented. And yet, when we have the topic of evaluation come up in the conversations around our teacher training, this might resonate with some folks here. Be careful when you say evaluation around folks in this school. There's a lot of emotion and anxiety around that word. Here we were as a group of folks walking in thinking we were adding and creating a positive space with some of the concepts we were bringing in. But just like identity is worth considering when we talk about evaluation, so too is context, right? The context of a community, people all come from somewhere. And so especially as you leave your classrooms, as you leave your programs and you talk elsewhere, you work elsewhere, as your graduates work elsewhere, it's important that you acknowledge, that they acknowledge the context around measurement wherever they go. Okay, so we're going to get started with an activity. And that activity is going to get us out of our seats. It's going to move us to the middle of this area here. I'll ask my colleagues who are taking care of video to maybe move that main camera. And this activity has many purposes, but the one purpose I'm hoping it allows for our session tonight is to surface assumptions and to bring into this space some of the assumptions we have about different terms that we use, measurement, impact, evaluation, learning, so that we can surface those before we get any deeper. Okay, so how this is going to work, you'll see a this or that question. This is very much a where do I stand on particular issues, on particular terms. You'll reveal your opinion about the question by physically standing on one side of the line or the other. So if you look back there on the floor, you'll see a piece of tape that runs down the middle of the room. That is a bisector that separates the room in two. And on one side, you have people who take one stance on an issue, and on the other, take another stance. And then we'll have some short discussion in hopes of surfacing opinions about things. And feel free at any time during the conversation to move if your opinion is changed by the words of somebody else. This is very much in the spirit of growth mindset, an opportunity to have our minds be changed if good arguments are surfaced. Okay, so maybe we'll leave everything here on our chairs. You don't need anything as you move your way back. Already, folks standing at either side, an attempt at balancing here. Okay, we're going to start with an easy one. Hopefully it'll evoke some emotions, hopefully perhaps some strong opinions, but it's not either or solely. Consider that wall to be an extreme opinion about an issue, and maybe over here a less extreme opinion, and over here kind of a not sure but leaning this way. And maybe we'll set, loosely maybe we're on you're standing as the extreme for that side of the opinion. So it's a spectrum, it's not a this or that solely. So consider how far away from the line you're standing. Okay, so on that note, on any given day, I am more mountains or beach. So if you are extremely beach, you're over there. If you're kind of semi-beach over here, I'm not sure, over here, and over there. Wow. Yeah, a Bavarian I heard, so perhaps that influences some of the opinions. So now, by the way, feel free to steal any activities. I'm sure that goes for the other speakers as well. Feel free to steal this. So as a facilitator, you might go to the extremes first. You might ask something like whoever wants. Often people have strong opinions. So maybe I'll open it up first to whoever has a very strong opinion that they would like to bring into the space about where they're standing and why. Yeah.
Open perspective.
Open. So beach, you love that it brings an open perspective or allows for that?
On top of a mountain.
Activities. Don't fall down.
Okay, maybe we'll take somebody. Renee, I'll pick on you. You might be among the ones closest to this one.
Childhood.
So not necessarily actually something that's quite interesting, thinking about the role that our past play in our preferences, not just our current status as adults and lifestyle. I have to go the furthest afield, all the way extreme on beach.
The wonderful exhaustion you feel after a day on the beach.
Okay, wonderful. The wonderful the wonderful exhaustion you feel after a day on the beach. Wonderful exhaustion is a great phrase, actually.
We have a wonderful exhaustion.
And maybe I'll ask for somebody who's close to the middle. Go ahead.
Feeling the horizon on both sides. Sitting on a mountain on top, then sitting on the beach. Having this calm down feeling, seeing the horizon.
Fabulous. I love that. Okay.
Diverse landscape.
In the mountains. Wonderful. Thank you for modeling one example of how this works. All right, so quite light to start. We're going to dive right into the deep end though. The next one is when I make decisions about my practice. Some of us work in classrooms, some of us work in organizations, some of us do both, some of us work outside of those contexts. But when I make decisions, wherever you work, I'm usually driven by intuition or evidence.
Stay on this side.
Now, this would be the moment when I would say you're not allowed to stand on the middle. You're actually going to force you to take a side or another, but we won't have that for today's activity. I'll acknowledge a significant weight on this side of the room, but I would love to open it up to folks on this side of the room first. Maybe Anna, you can go ahead.
I'm always feel driven by myself. So this is why I'm here on this side.
Always feel driven by yourself?
Yes.
And so that's why you're there?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? What do you mean by driven by yourself?
By how would you say?
Intuition.
Yes.
This side. It's this side.
You might be on that side. Driven by yourself. Not to put words in your mouth. Mario, maybe I'll ask for some explanation if you're willing to
I'm
offer.
working a lot with scientists and physicists and engineers, and you really need evidence to get your intuitions into products. And that's why I'm really evidence-driven, but I would like to have more intuition with it. So,
I appreciate the acknowledgement. Let's, maybe Oliver, if you want.
There is nothing like evidence. Believe in your gut feeling.
I love that. And maybe somebody in the middle. Fatima, would you be willing to?
Sure. I think it really depends on the task. So it's really kind of like this, honestly. I would say the creative tasks, it's more intuition based, as opposed to the, more of decision making tasks. It's that are not so creative. It's evidence.
Wonderful.
So yeah, it's in the middle.
Thanks for sharing.
Larry, may I add
Yeah.
one idea? Maybe intuition is a summary collection of a lot of evidence we experienced in the past.
I appreciate, something interesting. It's worth noting. Away with words. Away with words. And what you'll find is that ideas about the definition of the words sometimes come out as well. Conceptions about what these things mean. That's part of the purpose of this, not just to identify different opinions on the same exact thing, but to acknowledge that we might have different opinions altogether.
What's this thing about female intuition?
We've got it.
Never look.
Okay, on to the next one. We have, just for a point of reference, we have two more. They don't get any easier. So in design education classrooms, whether you work in them or not directly at this point, defining what success looks like is primarily the responsibility of, you can probably guess where this is going, educators or students. So my statistical brain thinks about the distribution curve right now for folks who are aware of statistical curves. We'll open it up to the educator side first. Would you like to share?
I think as an educator you have to facilitate such a room, and I'm the professor, so I have to decide what sort of room you contribute to the students to act as best as well. So the students are students, they are not professionals. So as a professional, you have your opinion about how to educate, and you have to facilitate the best possible way how to study. And that doesn't mean that you can do anything or whatever, but I think it's the first thing you have to do in school. You have to think about how to make a study culture. And therefore, I am responsible. So I'm the educator. I'm the one who is responsible for that space. And after that, the students make their way and adapt that for themselves, and then I'm out.
Thanks for sharing that. It's a great perspective, and I appreciate the explanation about some of the pressures also placed on professors to being in charge to a degree in their classrooms. Anybody have perhaps a counterpoint, or who is standing on the other side who just has a different opinion?
I thought in your conversation there was a sense of movement, that it's your job initially, but when you said primarily, it's like, it went like that, is that right? It's like you were expecting it to move
The students,
across,
they
but you
have their
started
own, so to say, responsibility in that.
I would love to hear, and then I'll get to the middle, because that's where the heat is, it seems. Yeah, go ahead.
I think every student is very special, so it's about personality. So I'm not the one who knows what is success for each of them. So I can only facilitate and give the framework to best possibilities to pick from them. So that's my own.
Thanks. And then maybe in the back, is there anybody that would, toward the middle perhaps, anybody that would like to share? Go for it, yeah.
I think it's a balance between educators and students, because I don't like this area, students and educators, because it's a learn group in this way. So that's why I'm saying no.
I love that. There's quite a bit of research around visible learning, or what learning looks like in the context of classrooms, the role of teacher, the role of student, and playing the role of each other perhaps, but both being learners and teachers, and shifting roles at different times.
Would be as a student, so.
Yeah. Okay, last one, though I really appreciate the conversations and hopefully it generates conversations after this session about what we mean by this. Okay, last one. In design education programs going forward, the primary purpose of measuring impact, and this exists, to be clear already, I imagine, in many programs, but if you had to do it again, the primary purpose is to learn or to evaluate. I love hearing groans. Groans is a good sign. It's a good indicator. All right, Alexandra. I heard a chuckle.
So I just thought we did circular economy today, and it's all about circles. And if you don't know where you are, you don't learn. You always need a starting point. So I'm just slow to swap the line. I'm with you.
Okay. Anybody else who just feels they're chomping at the bit? They have something to say about this one.
I think learning and evaluation, you need both, a balance of both in order to do both.
Yeah, there's no learning.
But there's no learning without evaluation.
If everything is great, then you learn lots.
This interplay between learning and evaluation is interesting, that ideally evaluations inspire learning and learning can inspire what you might evaluate. That interplay, rather than what feels like a this or that, is quite interesting, even though often measurement is posed as very much one or the other. So thinking about what a balance might be is quite provocative. Anybody else?
I thought about standing in the middle, because for me these are interdependent, of course, like everyone else said, but I do think if the goal is to teach, then for me helping evaluate is actually for the purpose of learning. So therefore I lean more towards learning, but I think you can't live without evaluating. But the result, the goal, the idea is to teach and for students to learn.
Fabulous.
Question like a primary purpose.
Yeah.
How to improve.
But they are interdependent. One can't be without the other.
Yeah, and they're cyclical, and they inform each other.
But one big thing, so when you evaluate, you always have bad and good. And who's saying that? So it's about you as a professor, you as one person, you're saying that's good and that's crap, so I don't know.
You can even say you can learn without evaluation, but you never can evaluate without learning.
Do I see any movement?
Well, the question is how you evaluate. You don't have to be quantitative.
Yes.
Please take 1 to 10. You can also have a qualitative feedback, which brings you to people.
But now you said the word feedback, so then I'm with you.
Yeah,
but
yeah. For me,
is always,
evaluation
it's
is
good
a
or it's
discussion.
bad.
Yeah.
So it's a scale.
It says measuring impact, so for me that's the key. So how do I measure impact? Has someone learned something?
Okay, I take it here.
I think it's not just about learning, it's also about research and putting the topic further up, and I think that needs evaluation just the same.
So
design education.
I'll end with that being the last thought. This is it. This is the conversation. This is what it's intended to inspire, and oftentimes measurement conversations are considered cut and dry. In other words, you articulate some things, put them on paper, send them out in the form of a syllabus, and there's no negotiation beyond that, and it follows down a system of hierarchy. This is the conversation that we need to be having. Okay, so with that, we'll come back to our seats. Okay, so this isn't going to be a ton of research per se, but it's going to be a couple bits of inspiration and provocations to follow on hopefully some of the provocations that you're already stewing on based on that last activity, and also that are rooted in the wonderful white paper, which was released, Designing Design Education. So what you'll see on a series of the following slides are a couple of quotes from research, quotes from the white paper, and then some provocations on what the implications are for measurement in that context. Really quickly, just a quick bit of a personal journey. I'm director of impact measurement at IDEO, and I entered IDEO 5 years ago as a social science researcher, as an education researcher, which was not a common path to a design firm. And so I entered with an idea that design was separate than measurement, and I was bringing measurement into a design space. So they were very much separate concepts. And perhaps as you'll see here with the next series of slides with some provocations, that there is an opportunity here to push on our idea of what validity and reliability in the context of measurement look like. And granted, those are scientific approaches to designing measurement tools, but there is a way to complement scientifically accurate tools with perhaps more casual, more everyday, more frequent, more formative forms of assessment that could be just as instructive to the types of changes that we want to make in our own teaching. Okay, so lots of words on a slide. I hate that. So I did a little bit of a service to highlight some things. Apologies. So the first one is from the Designing Design Education White Book. It talks about this idea of dynamic change and blurred boundaries being characteristic of design, this idea that things change quite often and quite unpredictably, such that there is new knowledge and new ideas that emerge without predictability. And then from an article in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, there's a provocation here about thinking more expansively about what we define as evidence in higher education programs. And so a provocation, if design education is to become more flexible as a discipline, then our measurement systems must be adaptable and responsive, so flexible just the same. As you'll see, there's an opportunity here to measure, to mirror measurement and design. So a couple bits of inspiration there. Out of MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the Teaching Systems Lab, is a game called Meta-Rubric. We have ideas about what rubrics do, what role they play in learning. Perhaps maybe you all use them in the form of critiques or in the form of evaluation at the end of a semester. Meta-Rubric takes that one step further, and it starts from the premise that rubrics are a good and useful tool, but they are not perfect, and they will never be perfect, so they should be iterative, and they should change. And so the game, which is it's actually intended for classrooms among students and among educators. It provokes you to design a rubric for a thing, a movie poster, but then to critique the rubric itself such that you're constantly redesigning the rubric, such that it's evolving as the learning evolves, especially in a context of innovation. This is quite a provocative idea. This is also a lot of words on a slide. The right-hand column, if you're going to focus on anything, is worth focusing on. This is from Michael Quinn Patton's 2006 book about a area of evaluation called developmental evaluation. Developmental evaluation is essentially how do we evaluate in the context of complexity, of innovation? How do we evaluate things that change frequently, where ideas emerge? Because evaluation environments are often ones that thrive when they're being held constant. If you think about controlled trials, control the variables, but innovation, design, these are contexts that change quite consistently and quite often and unpredictably. So how might our measurements, our evaluation mirror that reality? I especially love this last one, that evaluation feeds a hunger for learning. It gets to the point that was brought up earlier about one inspiring the other. Quite different than the way that we think about the role of evaluation. Okay, the next series of quotes here, that design takes the shape as a result of collaboration in diversely mixed teams. And this quite provocative quote from Dr. Amber Banks, who used to lead measurement and learning and evaluation for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, that the most important part of learning and evaluation is relationships. Probably not a collection of words that you've heard together. So if design education is intended to be relational, then our measurement systems must be able to gauge the breadth and depth of relationships and collaboration as well. How the heck do you do that? This is a network map. This is a map of people and their relationships with each other. These are employees at a client of IDEO's that works in the conservation space. And they came to IDEO with a question about how they grow a culture of design within a nonprofit that's focused on conservation. And what we did is we were thinking about growing a culture as growing a group of people who could then go out and be ambassadors for what they're learning within a cohort. And so how do you think about how you choose that group? Who are the people that you engage? And there are questions that we asked people at the company about who you know, who you go to. So you'll see that phrase there, go to people. Who are the people you confide in at your company? Who do you have confidence in? Who do you normally collaborate with? And what you end up with is a map of relationships in your classrooms or in your organization, of how you distribute information, of where people go to for information outside of class. And you end up realizing that that you can invest in the proliferation of certain ideas more strategically when you think about mapping the relationships within an organization or within a classroom, perhaps even. There's some interesting work about relationship mapping done in schools, where one way to predict if a student is going to drop out is how many social ties they have. So a student that has one or no social ties is much more likely to drop out than, let's say, somebody who's much more connected. So often entire school staffs will do this for their group of students. I'm looking at my former colleague Annette right now. This is a piece of work that she helped lead a number of years ago called Uncommon Indicators of Collaboration. This is essentially a checklist or a series of indicators that suggest that successful collaboration is taking place. And they're referred to as uncommon because these might not be behaviors that we would normally track systematically. For instance, students feel comfortable enough to burp in front of each other, or they make eye contact with one another. These are things that intuitively we observe that imply to us that things are going okay in our classrooms, and that maybe we should observe a bit more systematically than we are currently, because maybe these indicators collectively and in combination with our current evaluation tools have a great deal of meaning. Okay, there are 5 of these just for reference. This is the third one. This one's about social responsibility. So socially responsible values permeate all areas of the curriculum from the report, and the teachers I studied work in opposition to the system that employs them. That is one of my favorite quotes about what it means to be a culturally responsive teacher, a teacher that places learners' needs and learners' identities at the center of what they're doing. by Gloria Ladson-Billings. So if design education is to be socially responsible, then our measurement systems must address power and bias. Some tools for that. This is a really light touch one. That, by the way, is a great activity to surface bias, the one we just did. This is from the New York Times. It's a prediction tool or a hypothesis tool. It's called You Draw It, How Family Incomes Predicts Children's College Chances. We might have some ideas about this sitting here. The higher the income, the better chance they have of getting to college and persisting within. But what this asks you to do is to literally draw a line to predict. As the parent's income percentile goes up, what influence does that have? At what point does it surge? So it asks people to literally draw. So you might draw that as a predictive line based on your own assumptions, based on your own knowledge of this relationship, and then it presents to you the actual line. So how interesting would it be to think about having your students articulate hypotheses about what they might learn in a course just by virtue of the name of it, or by the professor who's leading it, to start to articulate what they're bringing in, the assumptions that they're bringing in. The more that we can do to surface these things, the better off we are. Last thing here is the equitable evaluation framework. This is quite interesting. It talks about all the orthodoxies in evaluation that we should be questioning, namely that evaluators are experts and that we should be pushing them back against these kind of typical ways of thinking about the role of evaluation, such that we can start to break down the evaluation, a bit of an evaluation perspectives that exist. Okay. This one, so practicing design as a process-oriented activity, and also that design is a way of doing. This one opens up the provocation. If design education is to focus on process over outputs, so not just deeming whatever we produce as the end goal, but actually how we're doing it to be valuable, then measurement systems must illuminate behavior and culture change. So who doesn't need a laugh detector? An IDEO designer took a few weeks to prototype an electronic detector based on a machine learning algorithm that gauged project teams, the degree to which they were laughing, and how often, the depth of laughter, how frequently this was taking place. And there was not only did it collect information on that, but it also, he built a feedback loop in the form of a light that sat in a project space that would grow warmer in color as the laughter got more rich and more frequent, and colder in color as the laughter wound down. And so just a bit of a provocation around the types of signals that we might look for as indicators of culture and of behavior change, and how feedback around that is the way that we might change behavior over time. New analytics of culture. This talks about the role of collecting, I don't necessarily advocate this, but the role that certain companies are playing in collecting the language that's used in email, on Slack, in Glassdoor postings, which is about jobs and job quality and hiring, and what that indicates about the culture of a company. Language can tell you quite a bit, right? The way that you exchange emails is quite illustrative of the culture in a company. All right, and the last one talks about interdisciplinarity. So I'll get right to the provocation here. So if design education is to be interdisciplinary, is not to just live within the confines of design, then our measurement systems must invite diverse perspectives and expertise. This group of beautiful people is an evaluation council, also formerly a design council for a program that I used to manage at IDEO. It's a collection of educators, leaders, community organizers, theoretically the recipients of a lot of the trainers that we, the training that we administered in community. And these are folks who all had very impassioned and informed perspectives on the status of the program, what we were measuring and why, the impact of it. And so how interesting would it be to think about distributing ownership of evaluation to multiple people, bringing in multiple perspectives from within, expertise from within our disciplines and from outside of it. And then lastly, this is an interesting one from the Eindhoven University of Technology talking about a multidisciplinary course that was prototyped, accompanied by a multidisciplinary group of assessors. So not just having a singular professor be the assessor of a multidisciplinary course, but in fact bringing in multiple professors, multiple experts to accompany that. Seems fitting, right, that you might have interdisciplinary combined with interdisciplinary assessment. Okay, that's a lot of information. Hopefully a little bit of inspiration that helped push thinking. So on one slide, the provocations around what measurement can and, dare I say, should be in the context of design education. How might we design and implement measurement tools that are adaptable and responsive, gauge the breadth and depth of relationships and collaboration, address power and bias, illuminate behavior and culture change, invite diverse perspectives and expertise? There is no singular tool that does all of these, but we might consider these as design principles, right? Singularly or in combination with each other in designing new tools, which is what we're going to do now. Okay. So let's make. This is not my bias for beaches coming through, to be clear, although I do live right outside of Los Angeles. Although California, the story goes you can surf and ski in the same day. If folks are, yeah, it's that close. Not to brag about California. I'm a native New Yorker, so. Okay. I'm embedding a framework here very simply. There's a framework called Understanding by Design, UBD for short, which is essentially the pitch of the importance of backward mapping. So not starting with this really cool activity or this really cool project that you want to embed into a learning environment, but instead is starting with what's the end goal that we're trying to create here, right? What are the graduates that we're trying to create? So you start with the desired results. You then move back to the indicators or evidence that those results are being achieved. And then from there, you design a learning experience that fits that, right? That's ideally co-designed and that's targeted in a way toward those goals. So that's going to look like a couple things that we're going to do in pairs. We're going to generate, and build. We're going to brainstorm a list of things, a list of results. We're going to brainstorm a list of indicators or evidence that we're going to be collecting. And then we're going to build a novel tool for each other. This is going to be quite intimate. We're going to do this in pairs. And just to point out a couple things that were on your chair, you should have two worksheets. One that's numbered 1, one that's numbered 2, and a set of Post-its. I think in the objectives I said something about building and breaking. I'm going to break my own tools here. These are suggested but not obligatory. So you'll see at the tables over here, which is where you'll be pairing up, some Sharpies, some pieces of large-scale paper if you'd prefer to work on there, or if you'd prefer to generate within your notebook or something, feel free to do that. Don't feel bound by the materials here. So we're going to start with the first worksheet there, which is Profile of a Future Design Graduate. And after we pair up here, we're going to be brainstorming around this question. What are the most important capabilities and or mindsets the world now requires of design graduates? This is a gigantic question, and one that you and your partner may have different ideas about. So the idea is hopefully in pairs, introduce, talk to each other, catch up how you feeling, get a quick temperature gauge, and then dive in for 5 minutes to generate. Let's go for breadth here. Generate as many, don't hone in on the perfect one just yet, but try to generate as many capabilities and mindsets that you think are important for design graduates right now as a pair. Okay? Any questions about the ask with respect to the brainstorm question? Okay. So if you can find a partner, somebody who might have similar shoes, somebody who you just look at first, whatever. Hopefully somebody who you haven't paired up with yet, but not an obligation. And then find a space at one of the tables, face your chairs together, and take 5 minutes to generate as many ideas as you can about this question.